Hi, my name is Angie Powers. I'm your Olathe NEA president. This presentation is just a little bit about the negotiations process and what's next. When we did this session live, we also had a great listening session, heard some great ideas from educators. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to your negotiations team or any of the committees that we're going to talk about in this presentation. So first off, let's go ahead and start with your negotiations team. As you know, our professional counsel is our body that does negotiations for the certified licensed bargaining unit. There are 6 district administrators, and then there are 6 Olathe NEA members, and each one of the Olathe NEA members that you see on your screen represent all of the bargaining unit. Clearly, we do each have our own expertise and our lived experience in the schools, but as we go into this space, we don't represent just high school educators or just special education. We represent all the members of the bargaining unit, including our counselors, our OTs, our PTs, our nurses, our early childhood educators rather, and on and on. So please never hesitate to reach out to any one of us. We are here to hear your feedback. In terms of what's next for negotiations, our next step is the intent to negotiate letter. In fact, your Olathe NEA representatives on professional counsel, which you saw on the previous screen, are meeting Friday, February 6th, this coming Friday, in the afternoon during during educator prep, the flex time, in order to start putting our draft of our intent to negotiate letter together. And you'll learn more about that here in just a couple minutes. Then we will exchange letters. The district will prepare theirs, we'll prepare ours, and then we'll exchange those letters. Then once we've exchanged those letters, we will have proposals and counter proposals, proposals and counter proposals back and forth until we reach a tentative agreement. And then, as you know, that tentative agreement does not become the 26-27 negotiated agreement until it is ratified by both the bargaining unit and the Board of Education. So let's talk a little bit about the Professional Negotiations Act. Licensed certified educators in Kansas have certain rights when it comes to negotiations, as outlined in the law that you see on your screen. Note that in the law, it identifies that parties will negotiate compensation. So that is a mandatorily negotiable item. In other words, Olathe NEA and or the board, neither side can say, you know what, we don't really want to negotiate compensation. It is mandatorily negotiable. Same goes for hours and amounts of work. Okay, neither side can say, we opt out. In addition, each party may select not more than 3 additional terms and conditions of professional service. And we'll look at that in just a moment. Anything beyond those items would be permissive items, meaning that either side, the district or ONEA, can say, you know what, we really don't want to negotiate that. Okay, so mandatorily negotiable, you must engage in negotiations, and then permissive would be those items that districts and bargaining agents can choose to negotiate, but either side can decline. So you'll see the mandatorily negotiable items as the first 2 items on your screen. And then you see that language of not more than 3 additional. And then those additional items can include what you see on your screen. So leaves, holidays, retirement, insurance benefits, grievance, disciplinary procedures, resignations through non-renewals, appraisal, and that is likely going to be something that you will see on at least one of the letters. Privileges to be recognized for the professional employees organization, that would be Olathe NEA, and then other matters mutually agreed upon. So that other matters mutually agreed upon is an important piece there. That means that both sides have to agree to negotiate items. So for example, safety language, behavior language, that's something that's popped in our surveys the last few years. That is something we have brought to the table before, but up to this point, the district has said we already have policies, so we declined to negotiate those further. One thing that we want to make clear is that the more people we have engaged in negotiations, then the more powerful our collective voice is. So in looking at timeline, like I mentioned, February 6th, the ONEA is going to meet to draft our letter. February 24th is when the district and ONEA will exchange our letters. Okay. March 3rd is our first negotiation session, really of like the main part of the negotiations year. And that is when we will go over, each side will go over their letter. Specific proposals will not be introduced, of course, but the areas that the negotiation session will focus on will be outlined on the 3rd. That would be a great opportunity to tune in via YouTube or live in person in the room to kind of see the scope of what we're going to be talking about in the negotiation season. March 31st is likely when proposals will begin. And then there will be proposal, counter proposal, proposal, counter proposal on down as you see through April and May. Now you will notice that the dates listed here stop in May. And the reason that we went ahead and stopped there is not necessarily that it's a guarantee that we're going to have a tentative agreement at that point. But if we were to have a tentative agreement by the end of the school year, like we have the last couple years, we would need to come to that agreement around that May 6th date in order for the bargaining unit to ratify, to have the opportunity to ratify, and then the same with the board. So if negotiations extend beyond that May 6th date, then it is likely that those negotiations, that the whole process might not be finished by the end of the year. Please know that the goal of negotiations is to get the best package possible. We know that people like to leave for the summer knowing and having certainty about the negotiations process. But if Olathe NEA feels like having an extended negotiations season would benefit the bargaining unit, then that would be what we would do in any year. The other thing I also want to mention is that generally compensation items, those items that really hit upon money, generally we don't get into those till probably mid or late April. And the reason that we don't really get into those until that time is generally around that time is when information starts coming out from legislative session regarding school funding. This year, the legislative session is scheduled to be very short. So we might be able to start getting into money earlier. But this also has been a really challenging year in the legislature. So we will have to roll with the punches. And the more that you, our bargaining unit members, can engage with your legislators on issues that are important to you, the better off we'll all be. In terms of educator voice, everything we do at the negotiations table comes from the voice of you, the bargaining units. That is our primary purpose, honestly, is to take what we hear from the bargaining unit, knowing that sometimes different voices from the bargaining unit do conflict with one another. And that's okay. We're not always going to agree on everything, but being able to find those things that you all say are most important to you and decide which of those things make the most sense at the negotiating table. And of course, there are other ways to come to solutions besides the negotiating table. So that sometimes will lead us into some organizing opportunities. So I wanted to just kind of briefly go over the survey results. We did have a good number of educators complete the survey before winter break. Really the top message that we are continuing to hear is that our job of educators are getting harder and harder. We had great representation amongst the main levels, but we also had great representation in early childhood and then multi-level. So we did have, I think, a good representative sample of our bargaining units. Obviously, compensation is key. So you all indicated in the survey that compensation is important to you. So outside of compensation, we also heard that the workload is a key factor in educators staying. Educator voice and respect, being able to make the choices, instructional choices, for example, that will help your students in your classrooms and learning spaces learn best. And then safe and healthy workplaces. Behavior supports have continued to be a high priority the last couple of years on that negotiation survey. Of course, pay always comes out as a key factor, but time and workload continue to be good competitors for top priorities with pay. And then, while the results to the questions about retention have improved since last year. We definitely are concerned about some of the retention issues that we have talked about the last couple of years. So 25% of those completing the survey said they aren't sure they would be in Olathe in the next 5 years, and 20% of those say that they're not sure they'll be in the profession. So we want to continue to not only attract quality staff, we want to be able to retain our quality staff. I also wanted to point out committees. Pretty much every bargaining unit update that I send out has a link to the professional council website, or you can Google Olathe Schools Professional Council. Of course, it has all the members of professional council here. And I wanted to point out that, of course, our meetings are here. It takes a week and a half or so to get the minutes in there. But under committees, these are professional council subcommittees, and each one of these committees, in one way or another, makes a recommendation to professional council that goes that ultimately goes to the negotiating table. So if you are really passionate about appraisal or benefits or calendar or conferences or extracurricular academic support, and you know any of the people on these committees, feel free to reach out to them. Even if you don't know them, their job on these committees is to represent the bargaining unit, not just represent their own personal opinion. So they would be glad to hear your feedback, as well as, of course, as the professional council members. Lastly, I want to say that one of the strongest ways to use your educator voice is staying up to date with what's happening in negotiations, and watch for calls of action. We know that we are facing a lot of challenging times, and those challenging times are driven by forces beyond our district. There are absolutely some things within our district, particularly declining enrollment, that are going to impact negotiations, but we have some larger issues state and nationally that are also impacting what's happening at the negotiating table. When we bring forth items that are important to you, those items are always going to have a larger impact if people are in the room to show that they care. So we want you all to be able to, yes, focus on your day job, supporting students. That is your number one priority. And when you can show up to advocate for your working conditions, you are advocating for your students. Lastly, our next Knowledge is Power session is March 23rd. We are open to it being a Q&A, for it to be a listening session based on negotiations so far. The Knowledge is Power sessions are really up to what you all as bargaining unit members would like. So feel free to complete the RSVP form, the tiny URL, or scan that QR code. Let us know if you're interested in attending, and or if you have any suggestions for a Knowledge is Power session. Thank you all so much, and never hesitate to reach out. Have a great day.